When you hear the stories my guest has to share, it's no wonder he became a Canadian and U.S. immigration attorney. Andy Sem-a-chuck is joining us to share stories of his mother, Solomea, who was born and raised in Galicia, an autonomous community now spanning southeastern Poland and western Ukraine. And this is a story of a loving mother who throughout her life had to overcome illness. She fled the destruction and devastation of World War II. She was a non-English speaking refugee and immigrated to North America, eventually a single mother, and so much more. It took 50 years before she opened up and shared the details of her life. And it's all detailed in the book, A Promise Kept, a tribute to a mother's love, written by her son, my guest and attorney, Andy Sem-a-chuck. Andy, welcome to Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm very happy to be able to share my life and the story of my life with you here today.
You are living in Toronto now, is that correct?
Yes, I'm practicing law in Toronto with Pace Law Firm.
And you have practiced many years, if not decades, in the US as well, immigration law.
Yes,
correct?
as a matter of fact, I spent 10 years practicing in Los Angeles and then 5 years in New York. So I've lived in both countries, Canada and the United States, during the course of my life.
And did it specifically have to relate to your mom and her experience that gave you this interest in immigration
Yes.
law?
Well, several factors. First of all, the immigrant experience, as I document in this book, and many others have lived through that immigrant experience, is something dear to me, particularly because my mother was so, impacted by that experience.
Okay.
And it influenced me to become an immigration lawyer because I felt a kinship with the people who are going through that experience, the hardships and the turmoil involved with changing your country and going to a new country and getting reestablished.
Yeah, it's very close to a lot of our hearts now, especially as well. So
Yeah.
I can only imagine the rigorous endeavors that your mother went through coming here back in after World War
48.
II.
Yeah, just after the war.
So she got meningitis as a little girl, is that correct?
Yeah, so her story goes like this. As a young child at 2 years old, one day while she was playing out with some other children, she came home and exhibited some signs that appeared to be like a cold. But in short order, the parents realized that there's a problem of some kind, called in a doctor, and he ultimately diagnosed her with meningitis. It cleared up and everything seemed okay, except later when she was playing around on her own nearby, a neighbor noticed when she was calling her, the neighbor calling Solomea, my mother, that my mother was sticking out one ear and not the other. So they called the doctor in, and he alerted the parents to the fact that she had lost all her hearing in her left ear. Later, several years later, when she was 12 years old, she came down with scarlet fever, and
Oh my
regretfully,
goodness.
that illness took most of her hearing from her right ear. She ended up effectively deaf. She could only hear about 20% on her right ear.
So that changed her life. I mean, people can overcome this, right?
Yeah.
But back then, even more challenging and not as much aid and assistance, correct?
Yes. She was fortunate in a sense, and the fortune was in the fact that she had had enough hearing so that her vocal, the way she spoke and everything, did not signal away to people listening that she was deaf. Um, it, Most people who are deaf, they don't have the hearing to be able to correctly speak, and you can sort of detect when you talk to a deaf person who's deaf from birth, for example, that they can't quite hear because they don't quite pronounce
Sure.
all the words completely. But in her case, that was not part of her issues in terms of dealing with other people. She was quite able to deal with everybody without them even realizing that she was deaf. She was also able to read lips. She learned to read lips, so she could read what you were saying by just watching your lips. And that was a handy little, skill
Trick.
that she had that she would be able to use in conversations with people. But in terms of going to school and in terms of group meetings, such as around the dinner table or whatever, she had deficiency because she had to be alerted that someone's talking to her so she could look at that person and read their lips. And in school, she couldn't hear what people were saying behind her. She could see the teacher and she could read the lips of the teacher and what the teacher was saying. But it was a handicap for her in terms of learning to not be able to hear what was going on in the class otherwise.
How high education did she get?
Well, she got through high school and she went to vocational school for um, sewing. She was able to sew. She ultimately ended up sewing for women in the opera costumes and things like this, and later also clothing, various clothes. So she was a seamstress, and that's how she made a living.
That's very close to my heart. My mom was quite the designer and seamstress, and I think it's just magical what people can do. So that's very impressive. So did she let this hinder her life, her lifestyle? Was she a big reader? Did she have a great sense of humor? What was your mom like?
She, first of all, she didn't want the world to know or to handicap her in any way in her relationship to the world. She preferred for the world to, deal with her as if she was just anybody else. I don't know if I can call it shame, but she just wanted to be like everybody else, and this handicap was in the way, as she saw it, to her relationships with other people. Um, in some ways, it blocked her. It was like she was behind it. She was in the world, but there was this glass pane between her and the world that she was dealing with. And that glass pane
Yeah,
was obviously the incapacity to hear what these people were talking about.
right. She was visible, but also kind of invisible at the same
Right.
time.
As for education and general world knowledge, she read vociferously in terms of newspapers, journals, and so on, and indeed even books. So she was not an uneducated woman. And she came from a world of, well, her aunt was an opera star. So, excuse me. So uh, it was a high society sort of lifestyle when it came to dealing with her aunt and her grandmother and so on, who was the my great aunt's sister. Um, so there was an element of culture, shall we say, or civilized behavior and so on that she sort of traveled in those circles, so she knew that kind of life.
So she didn't hide in the shadows
No,
from the people in the opera and the celebrities and
oh
the
no,
spotlight.
no. Uh, one of the profound contradictions of her life and her aunt Solomea's life was this fact. Both were named Solomea, both were patriotic Ukrainian women, both were kind of feminist in orientation. But Solomea, my mother, the niece, could not hear the voice and the singing of her aunt that the world applauded and
She
loved.
was a famous soprano opera singer. She
Right.
worked with uh, Puccini and Tosca, and she worked with all the
Toscanini
fame,
and
all of them.
Caruso. Yeah,
Caruso, Enrico
yeah,
Caruso. And
yeah.
your mom couldn't, why? Because was music different
She
than?
could not hear. She could not hear the music.
Mm.
She could not hear the sound of uh, like my great aunt's voice was her strength as an opera star. It was melodic and it was enchanting, and world audiences were, whenever she performed, she was able to capture world audiences because of the beauty of her voice. But the great irony was that in their relationship, she knew and my mother knew that my mother could not appreciate the great sound of her aunt.
Of her aunt's voice. But couldn't she feel the vibration? Because often hearing impaired can.
Yes. There were later in her life, I used to bring her, and I'll just show you. I used to bring her a headset like this, and I'd put it on her head and play the music loudly. And she could hear, she had the vibrations and she could hear. And it was astounding to her to hear,
Wow.
music, people singing, and so on. But that was much later in her life when she was already in her 50s and 60s.
So how old were you when she finally opened up to you about all of her past?
I was 50 years old when I first cracked the silence that she had vowed she would keep with respect to her hardships in terms of coming to Canada and her history, her life history as a refugee
And
uh,
a single mom.
and a single mom, right?
Why? Why did she feel she had to
Okay.
swear to silence?
So the story is like this. During the war, she lived with my great aunt and her family, my grandmother, my grandfather, and so on, in the same apartment when Nazi Germany had occupied Poland and the city of Lviv.
Mm.
While the Holocaust was going on the streets of Lviv, they were living in a building that was my great aunt's, but was taken over by the German army, the Nazi army.
That's
And they
rough.
said, and just thankfully, because of my grandfather's intervention, he was a judge under Poland with Solomea, the opera star. They went to the German high command and said, look, you're trying to get us out of this building, but this is Aunt Solomea's building. It's her building. And they said, well, we don't care. We need it we're requisitioning it for the army. And they reached a compromise. And the compromise was that my family, not me personally, but my family, would have one apartment in a three-story building for all the family members that were living in the building. And so there were about 6 or 7 people living together in that one apartment on the top floor. And below was the German army,
Right.
like lieutenants and colonels or whatever, functioning the German army. So that's how they survived through the war. But my mother and her sister and my grandmother and grandfather all escaped into the West as refugees, going into Germany and ultimately into Austria, where my mother ended up. That's pre-arrival into Canada.
I do have one question about them living in the same building with all these Nazi soldiers. Did
Right.
they have Solomea, the opera singer, perform for the German
No,
soldiers?
of course not. No,
Because often people stayed alive because they would entertain
no,
or.
no. There was no cooperation.
So
The
you're.
Germans were hated by our
Oh,
family.
yeah, I totally understand, but often they had to do something to stay
Of course.
alive. Who gave her that cue to be silent, or why did she go in that direction? This is a story of a woman who.
Well, uh, I'll share it with you. Let's see how far we get. Okay.
Mhm.
She's in a refugee camp in Salzburg, Austria. A letter comes from Canada from a farmer at Park Court, Alberta, to the camp saying he's looking for a woman who could come and join him on the farms in Park Court. Park Court, Alberta was near Edmonton, Alberta, if you know where Edmonton is.
Mhm.
It's a small, there's nothing there in Park Court. It's not the end of the world, but you can almost see the end of the world in Park Court, especially in the winter. That letter ended up in my mother's friend's hands. She read the letter, but she said, "Well, this guy's too old for me. Maybe you'd be interested." So my mother read the letter, and the guy said, "Look, I live on a farm in Park Court, have a couple of kids. I need, my wife has died, and I need someone to come and live with me. Would you, I'm looking for someone." So she wrote to him saying, "Well, I'm in a refugee camp, and like I'd be interested in coming to Canada if you sponsored me." And I said, "Okay, I'll sponsor you." So he sponsored her, and she came to Park Court. Now there was a problem right at the beginning, and the problem was this: this guy had 6 children.
I had a feeling there was something
Yeah,
there.
That was a surprise. Now, a little bit about him because it affected her. They came earlier in 1938 to Canada. The mother, who was 38 years old, one day was cooking for the family, keeled over, and it turned out that she had appendicitis. He had to drive her out to the hospital in Edmonton, which was 60 miles away, on horse and buggy, and she died on the operating table, leaving 6 kids behind and him. She came back. He brought her back, her body, and they buried her near the farm. So this guy was stuck with 6 kids, and he didn't know how to cook. He didn't know anything. So he's looking for someone to step in on an emergency basis.
Absolutely understandable.
My mother shows up. My mother can't hear well.
Yes.
She's from an opera family. It's not like she never lived on a farm or anything. They had, chickens and a cow. But she thought if they had chickens and a cow, she would know how to live on a farm. Well, a farm back then in the middle of nowhere was a little more challenging. So they lasted together for a year. But in the winter, there was nothing to do. The snow was like 5 feet high. There's no heating, there's no nothing. They're living in a one-room farmhouse. And the only thing they had was a radio. So all these people are listening to the radio, but she can't hear the radio. So she had nothing. She was kind of isolated in a one-room farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. And it was hard on her, hard on them. But they lasted through the winter. But it became clear pretty soon that this isn't going to work. And she decided, I don't care, I don't care that I don't have any money. I don't care that I don't have anybody to go to. I don't care that I don't speak English. I'm leaving. And she said, I'm going to Edmonton. And he said, well, I'm not going to Edmonton. I have a farm here. I'm not going to leave it. And she said, I don't care. I'm leaving. Now, there was some roughness involved in how he treated her. And she decided, oh, no, Val, this is not for me. So one day she got one of the children to get the horse and buggy, and she got on the horse and buggy and traveled to Evansburg, which is a little town nearby, and caught the Greyhound bus into Edmonton. Now, here's a woman, she's in her 30s, she's a refugee, doesn't speak English, no money, no contacts, can't hear, and the problem is she's pregnant. She doesn't know who to turn to. She turns to the lawyer who made out the papers for her to come to Canada in Edmonton. She's there in that office, and he's not there. So they say, sit down and wait. So she's sitting in the office in the reception with a bunch of other people who are also waiting. And there's this lady next to her who's trying to sort of figure out, well, who's this person? They say, it takes one to know one. So if you're in trouble, and this lady was in trouble, she could recognize right away that my mother was in trouble. So she says, well, what's going on? What's going on? And my mother thought, well, who's this strange lady? She's probably after my money, whatever money she had. I don't want to talk to her. So she waited. The lawyer never showed up. So my mother went out the door, and she's getting out of the building, and this lady followed her. And she says, hang on, what's your name? Solomea. Solomea, tell me your story. What's wrong? She says, well, I don't have any place to go. And this lady says, well, come stay with me. I have a house up in North Edmonton. Come with me. And she ended up going and staying with this. And this lady was, she had a house, and she stayed there for 2 weeks with the lady. But meanwhile, she's pregnant, and something had to be done. She had to see a doctor and all this stuff. So she arranged to see a doctor, a guy named Wine-Loss Clinic in Edmonton is out there to this day. Guy saw her and says, where are you from? Ukraine. What are you doing here? Came as a refugee. And he set her up with some Roman Catholic nuns near the General Hospital in Edmonton, saying you could stay there with them. So she stayed there for a while. But that was not a suitable place for her. But there was a place, it was called the Bulow Home in North Edmonton for pregnant girls, single pregnant girls. And so they sent her up there, and she stayed there. And that's where I ended up with her
Being born
and then going back to that place. But she couldn't stay there forever. Now that she's got a child, she got to move on. Where is she going to go?
She overcame all these obstacles. But can you summarize the essence of your mom for me? She obviously has had an incredibly difficult childhood and young adulthood.
She was fiercely independent. Her vision of herself was, I don't need your help. I can get through this myself. Don't take pity on me. I can cope with whatever life has to give me. She would not tolerate any demeaning conduct or physical harm. One touch was enough. That was it, a harmful touch. So she broke off with my father, my natural father, and that was it, like forever. And notwithstanding the weakness that she, can't hear, no money, doesn't know a person, deaf, pregnant. She gets on a bus leaving the farm to go to the city with nobody to go to and no future. Well, what's she going to do? But she just took it on herself to do that.
It's bravery, right? But did she instill all of that in you as a young boy, or was she very quiet and just watched you as you grew?
No.
Was this a constant? You shouldn't be like this.
I have no room for pity for me or sympathy or whatever. Well, I mean, I'm a human being. I sympathize with people and so on, but I don't want needless sort of. I'm not telling this story for people to feel pity for me or my.
No, but it's the lessons that are passed down from the women that precede us, right? Yeah. That's the really magnificent.
I'll tell you. Okay, I'll give you this later on insight into this story. Okay, this comes later.
Okay.
I watched my mother put me through law school on her hands and knees, washing floors.
Very admirable. Oh my gosh. After all she'd been through. And law school, not even just undergrad. Oh my gosh. Solomea. What a beautiful woman. No, this is magnificent to hear how she stood tall on her feet.
So as I mentioned, I was born, we went to the Bellow home. She's trying to figure out what to do. She's doing odd jobs, washing dishes in restaurants, sewing, things like this. But people don't want, a woman with a child. Back then, that was not a great, people weren't open to that kind of a life. So it was difficult for her to find a place to live. But there was this lady, her name was Julia Kaniski, and she later became an alderman in Edmonton, like a city alderman.
Mhm.
And she lost like something like 6 or 7 elections, and then she got elected. And from that day on, nobody could defeat her. She ended up for the rest of her life being an alderman. She was one lady that helped my mother. And another group that helped was the Salvation Army. Um, and because she was Ukrainian, there was a Ukrainian community that she reached out to. There were people, other ladies that she got to know who also had hardships. This lady that saved her or had her come to live with her told her story to my mother, and her story was that her husband, this lady who accommodated my mother for a while, was an alcoholic, worked
Her
hard, an
husband.
alcoholic, yeah.
Yeah.
And one day he was coming home and he got creamed by a huge truck that was on
Oh
the
boy.
street because he was walking on the street. So she ended up with a house and 2 children. But before he got creamed, he used to come home and beat her, and she used to
Ugh.
hide under the bed so that he couldn't get to her
Oh my
while the
gosh.
children were screaming and all this stuff. So that lady, we used to call her the widow. They were friends for many years afterwards, and she sometimes would say, "Okay, Andri, meaning me, Andy, ходи, idem do vdove. Come on, we're going to the widow's house." And we'd go
Mm.
visit her. I remember her son used to eat eggs, coming home from work, eating eggs, bacon and eggs with ketchup on, on the
Oh my
eggs.
God. So what language did you and your mom speak?
Ukrainian.
Ukrainian.
Yeah, yeah. So, and there were others. There was this one, I'll just share this little insight too, because it has to do with the book. There was a lady named Dora Putzentello, who used to be also in a hardship kind of a situation. And we'd go and visit her, and she ended up, her husband died. She raised a boy by herself, and her husband left her a little house with a store at the front of the house. And we'd go in and visit her. And when we did, I would sit on the steps going up to her house from the store while the 2 ladies sat at the kitchen table together and commiserated with each other about their hardships, crying to each other
Yeah.
about how hard it was to be single mother, raising kids, and how the society didn't offer much help, etc. And one day, Dora Putzentello turned to me. I was probably about 13 or 14, maybe younger, 12. And she said, looking at me sitting on the steps, she said, Andrew, Andy, moment. Um,
Take your time.
Maybe sometime you'll be able to share it with others.
And look at what you're doing. You've helped tens of thousands of people, haven't you?
Yeah.
Immigration attorney.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Andy, this is amazing.
So,
Oh.
when I'm sharing this story with you, I told you it's a sacred story for me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I shared with you, I'm kind of I'm sorry that I'm sort of not able to control myself in terms of sometimes the emotions sort of explode on me. But my mother didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. She looked in the Edmonton Journal for jobs and opportunities, and some guy named William Semotiuk put an ad in the paper saying, I'm a retired railroad man. I have a house. I'm looking for a woman to come and help me in my house. And she thought, like he's an older guy. I don't know, but I'm okay. I'll check him out. And she went looking for him, found his house. He wasn't home at first, but he had somehow, maybe I guess in the first trip he was home, so they met. But he told her, listen, if you ever want to come back, I keep the key here under the mat. You can use the key to come in. So the second time she came, I came with her, and he wasn't home. So she took the key, opened the door, started cooking something, I don't know, soup or something, borscht or whatever. And he came home, and I was lying on the bed.
Oh dear.
She's cooking. And that was the start of our life together.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
For
So,
how many years?
well, 9 years until I grew up to be 9 years old, and then he died. He had cancer of the stomach.
Wow.
So the story, all the story about the farm, her hardships coming into the city, the widow, wine loss clinic, my birth and all that were all secret to her. She didn't want to talk about that. She didn't want to talk about my father. I didn't know his name, nothing. And William Vasil was his name in Ukrainian. Before he died, he made his money on the railroad. He was a foreman on the railroad in CPR Railroad in Canada. He rode one of those, the things where you
Sure, you crank.
down the track, fixing the rail. And he had a group of guys with him. And he made enough money, and he lived through the Depression, but he was working. So he didn't suffer, and he bought some houses on tax sales during the Depression. And that's how he made some money. So by the time my mother showed up, he was in his 60s. Well, 59, I guess. Now she was in her 30s, so there's quite a big difference there. But, they both had needs, and, it just kind of worked somehow. Now, he was not, like, as he was getting sick and so on, he realized that, hey, these people have nothing. Who's going to look after him after I die? And so he left his estate to my mother and me. And so, so this is why my name is Sem-a-chuck, in his honor. And it's I guess I owe it to him also that I'm a lawyer here talking to you. I don't guess, I know it is. And so that's the story about how it became a secret. So as far as I was concerned, as I was growing up, okay, I called him Giaggio, sort of, what would you call that? Sort of like
Grandfather.
Yeah. And he took care of me. I mean, he, took me to school the first day, and taught me how to ride the bike and the whole works. 9 years old, my mother tells me at Christmas time, Ukrainian Christmas, I got to go to the hospital. We're going to go to the hospital. Now, normally children didn't go to the hospital, especially 9 years old, but they knew that he was dying. And so they said, well, he can see him, can see him. So I went to the hospital. Now, for me, this was not a grand event. I didn't think this was like, showcase city or anything like that. I thought, okay, I know he's sick and I'm going to go see him. But the nurses at the hospital were behaving very emotionally when I showed up. So I registered that this is a big event.
Bigger than you thought, different from what you thought.
Yeah. And, I sat at his bedside. He said, be a good boy, listen to your mother. Um, take care of your mother and you.
What a wonderful role model. If only for a number of years, right? You're very lucky.
And so he died.
I'm so sorry.
And so my mother and I ended up, he left her a rooming house. Now I'm coming to the story about her washing floors. She was able to look after me and put me through law school is she rented out rooms in an apartment. And to do that, it had to be the way she kept it full all the time, which was our livelihood because she had nothing else, was sparkling clean. It was, the people who came when they saw it, it was so clean and fresh that they said, well, I'd love to live here.
Yeah.
And so it was always rented and so on. And she, one of the things about me is I've always been dressed very well. And the reason was because she was seamstress and she'd sew my clothes and so on. So
Sure.
other kids would run around in jeans, torn out apart jeans and stuff like that. But I was always dressed up well. I didn't like it. I wanted to be in jeans, but that was the way it was. Anyway, that takes us to our lives together. She puts me through law school. I get through law school. I start practicing law.
Once you were through law school, was your mom's demeanor? Was she happy? She was always working, but she always found these angels that were there to help her. It's amazing what you guys experienced. But was she ever jubilant in her life?
Oh, many times, like, great accomplishments, my going through law school, my getting married, but we're having, grandchildren for her.
Yeah.
That was all great for her in her life.
And how old was she when she passed?
She was 95.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very impressive.
Yeah.
A hard worker. She never doubted. She always kept putting one foot in front of the other. That's really, really impressive. Wow. There's so much more to the story, Andy, and I do want people to read your book. Your book is called A Promise Kept, a tribute to a mother's love. And it's such an honor to have you here and to share this story. And I know Canada pretty well. So I love that you're in Toronto. Where can people find you? I have your lists of your Facebook pages and your LinkedIn. Is there any one or two pages that are the most likely for people to find you?
If they go to myworkvisa.com, that's my website, my personal website. The book is on Amazon. You can get the book anywhere on Amazon.
Yeah, and you have the Solomea book as well of your great aunt, which is a phenomenal story for everybody to check that out as well.
That one is on audiobook as well, and I think the audiobook is the best element in that book.
And I will post all of your other links that you had sent me up. They'll all be in my show notes, okay? Yeah. Thank you for sharing this tender, precious, heart-wrenching and heartwarming story of a woman who was strong and courageous and didn't stop at anything. And look at you, magical Andy.
Well, thank you for having me on your program.
Thank you so much. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Should Have Listened to My Mother.